So, good morning, everyone. You probably heard it yesterday. Welcome to Rome. I'm happy to be here, that's for sure. First international travels in a long time. My name is George Paraskevakos. I'm the Executive Director of the International Probiotics Association, and it is my honor and pleasure to be your host for the day. I can say this has been a big sigh of relief for me because we've been planning this conference together, or this track day together with the Rome Congress, and basically there was a lot of virtual discussions. There's no more meeting physically, or there wasn't any, and it was hard to kind of plan it this way. I've never done this before. Probably the hardest kind of event we had to plan at IPA, but I can't believe the day's here, so big sigh of relief for me. But thank you for joining. It's been a few years we've been discussing this, and I'm very happy to be part of this Congress. Hopefully we can repeat it in 2 years' time. We're running a full-day program today, simultaneous with the Congress up on the building up top. And with the new reality, we had some speakers that had to pre-record our live stream. So we'll have a mixed bag today of, I would say, live presentations that'll be on the mic, and we'll have a closing panel. We'll have some pre-records. The regulators that are from international countries, they really couldn't travel, so we have some pre-recorded sessions and we have some live streams. So the morning session will feature very relevant regulatory topics from different corners of around the world. We're going to start with Canada. We'll have updates from the States, from USA, Australia, Argentina, and then transition into the specific work we're carrying out in the IPA Europe office in Brussels. The work that will showcase the approaches to, hopefully we can work to bring probiotics back into the conversation in the European environment. Then we'll wrap up the morning with a codex overview, which IPA initiated back in 2017 at the CCNFSDU 39, which Argentina picked up, and they're leading the work, and now Malaysia has joined as well. And hopefully a harmonized approach to the global probiotic landscape might be the game changer. Who knows, we'll see. And then in the afternoon, the agenda's pretty riveting as well. We'll cover research that IPA is working on for the intake of fermented foods, daily dietary microbes, our collaboration with IDF and all other terms Biotic initiative, the resilience manuscript, on the gut microbiota and probiotics, and the presentations will culminate with, we have a Dean Gina Kadar from the Southwest College of Naturopathic Medicine, and this is the first, IPA put together the first probiotic accredited university course that will be given within a Masters of Science program. It's a 4-year program. This is a 24-hour probiotic education, two credited course within the university. Gina will be here to talk about that. And then we'll end the day with a nice drink. After all this talking, our mouths will be dry. It'll be time for some cocktails up at the top. You'll follow the sections. I hope you can all join us. So before we begin, I'd like to really sincerely thank our sponsors, because without them our day cannot have happened. I'd like to, Dln Probiotics and Enzymes, and who's the head sponsor of the day. I'd like to invite Susan Beckard, who's the Vice President of Marketing at Dln, and alongside her, Vice President of Research and Science, John Deaton.
Thank you, George. Good morning, everyone. It's great to finally be able to travel again, and here we are in Rome. I'd like to just give you a brief introduction to who Dln Probiotics and Enzymes are, and why we believe it's critically important to engage with this work that the IPA is doing on the regulatory issues across the globe. Dln has been supporting IPA in promoting the safe and efficacious use of probiotics globally for years. We're confident that if we work together as an industry with academia, we'll be able to eventually talk more clearly about the benefits of probiotics to the consumers. We would like to thank IPA and IPA Europe for persevering the dialogue with the health authorities across the globe. And we are proud to partner with IPA on today's event. So thank you for that opportunity, George. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. Okay. So Dln Probiotics and Enzymes is headquartered in the state of Georgia in the United States. We've been engaged with the clinical validation of probiotics and digestive enzymes for decades. Meanwhile, across the ocean, the Danish company that was previously known as Bifidon was engaged in clinical validation of lactic acid bacteria. With the acquisition of Bifidon by Dln Probiotics and Enzymes in 2019, the company became a true global player with a combined and comprehensive microbiome-focused product offering. We are now proud to feature prebiotic technologies in the shape of our phage technology that we have branded Prefor Pro. We have a comprehensive portfolio of bacilli, spore-forming bacteria, of which DE111 is our flagship, with I think about 12 studies finalized. We have a portfolio of lactic acid bacteria that we brand under Bifolac that are mainly targeting women's health and oral health with the clinical investigation. And finally, from the product offering side, we have the ability to combine probiotics and digestive enzymes for a nice microbiome product. We believe strongly and we pursue innovation and clinical validation to add value to our customers. And we are committed to continue to contribute to microbiome research, not least to support the work of the IPA and the regulatory. Oops, that was the wrong way. Okay. At Dln, everybody is motivated by science, and we measure ourselves by the wellness we provide to our users. Our vision is for people of all cultures to benefit from our products, and our mission is to measurably improve the quality of people's life when they take our products. As I said, the company has now a global footprint with 5 state-of-the-art manufacturing facilities in the US and Denmark. We have 9 R&D labs and development labs and quality labs also across the 2 continents. We have many years of experience when we combine our staff, and then I think the quality of our products, which I will get back to, is key to our commitment to the safety of the product too. Global presence. We have people stationed in the US, in the European continent, and the Asia-Pacific region to work closely with the academia as well as customers locally. Our clinical validation covers the health conditions you see in this slide. Obviously, digestive health is one of the main drivers of probiotic application along immune health. Women's health is a stronghold of the company based on our lactic acid Bifolac strains. DE111 has also shown good results for cardiovascular health, sports nutrition, and then we have our food intolerance products that we cover with the digestive enzymes. So with a broad coverage of the microbiome functioning, we do lots of clinical investigation in this space. This is just to show you a few of our clinical studies. Let's focus today on the DE111, Bacillus subtilis, which John will talk a little bit more about in a moment. 12 clinical studies across multiple health conditions, and we continue to work on this promising soil-based microorganism. Is that right? Good. Okay, the lactic acid bacteria features all the documented probiotic strains. We try, or we always formulate our products so that the end of shelf life content is in accordance with the clinical studies, and we do stability test all our products before we provide them to the customers. Dosage forms is something that we work with a lot to ensure compliance with adults as well as kids, to make sure that the probiotics are actually taken for more than the day you buy them. The quality certifications, again, a critical issue in our pursuit of safety, is critical for many customers around the world. The brands that we work with are on the same page with respect to safety. And here we are. Let me introduce John Deaton. John is our, Dr. Deaton, I should say. John is our VP of Science and Technology. John works out of the Kennesaw facility in the United States. John has a big organization for research and development. We have a lot of highly educated people on board, but we also work closely with universities and teaching institutions across the globe. You see some of them here. Oops. As we work on this slide, I will just show you that for DE111, Bacillus subtilis, we have numerous clinical studies, and they are all listed here. Digestion, regularity, sports nutrition, cardiovascular is a new one, and then we have focused a lot of on the children, and we have good results in children and immunity. Yeah. So that's the DE111. The latest study we have done with DE111, I will leave John to talk to, because that is, I think we can, without exaggerating, say that this is a little bit of a state-of-the-art idea that they came out of John's lab. So do you want to talk just briefly about the
Sure,
germination?
thank you. It's always exciting with IPA conferences, always learn something new with the latest research, and also to be able to talk about some of our research that we've done. So one of the things, as we mentioned, of course, I think probiotics can be very beneficial to human health as well as pets. And so we look at that, and one of our most efficacious products is our DE111, which is a Bacillus subtilis. We chose Bacillus for its robustness, its hardiness, being able to survive in various conditions that your standard LIBs cannot, so you can put it in gummies and things like that. But one of the things that we are asked is, well, it's a spore, it's a soil-based organism. We know that you consume it when you're eating plants and things like that, vegetables, etc. And you can consume it with koji and things like that from places like Japan, for instance. And so one of the things, though, is does it actually grow in the digestive tract in your body? So we can do under physiological conditions, but actually to show it in the body is actually something that's quite difficult. You can look at fecal, but that's really the distal colon. That's after it's actually went through the digestive tract, the stomach, the small intestines, and then through the large intestines, which is a 3-day journey. So what we wanted to do is actually get an image, a sample of it right as it's in the small intestines, because we think that those conditions are ideal for growth, the right oxygen, pH, etc. And so that's basically what we did. We actually did an ileostomy, so people that actually have a bag at the very end of their ileum. So they're still healthy. They consume, they can eat whatever they want to eat. They live a normal life, except for they just have the bag at the end that we can actually pull their sample and actually test what's occurring in the small intestines. And so we did that. They took basically DE111 or a placebo, and of course this is a double-blind, placebo-based, randomized clinical, and they actually consumed it, and then we looked whether or not we actually got growth of the spores. Did they vegetate, and then how quickly they vegetated, and we were able to show that actually vegetated quite nicely. We actually had high levels, 10 to the 6th, 7th, and 8th, and then it occurred within a few hours. And so after 3 hours, we were able to actually detect vegetative growth. So that was actually very impressive. So we can actually show that spores, Bacillus subtilis, can actually grow very well in the digestive tract, especially D111, and proliferate at levels that are actually on par with the endogenous levels of the bacteria in the small intestines, around 10 to the 7th, 10 to the 8th. And so, yeah, that's basically what we've done. We're actually now looking at metabolites that are actually produced during this span, and so we think that that's very beneficial. Again, digestion, immunity, a lot of that occurs in the small intestines. Being able to proliferate and grow well in the small intestines is a major benefit.
Thank you, John. And with this brief introduction of Dln Probiotics and Enzymes, back to you, George. Thank you to everyone for being here and supporting the important work of the IPA.
Thank you, Suzanne and John, for that insightful look, and thank you to Dln Probiotics and Enzymes for the sponsorship of our track day. Much, much appreciated. Moving on into our presentations. The first one is from a regulatory agency, Health Canada, the Natural Health Product Directorate, Michael Steller. He's a supervisor at Health Canada. Canada has been an interesting experiment because IPA was at the table in 2009, 2010, and part of 11. I was there discussing how to help a regulator understand probiotics and how to help commercialize probiotics. And hence what came out of those discussions of over 2.5 years with industry and stakeholders and associations such as ourselves. At the time I was on the board, I was working for a company, was the probiotic monograph. It's been evolved, and over time I think has become the model that a lot of government agencies have looked at and have asked a lot about. I mean, I've been in discussions, even some agencies have asked IPA to enable discussions, with Canada to understand how that approach goes. So this is a pre-recorded session just last week. So it's Michael Steller from Health Canada. I'll let you, we'll switch to the presentation.
Hello everyone, my name is Mike Steller. I work with Health Canada with the Natural and Non-Prescription Health Products Directorate, particularly with probiotics alongside some other products. And I've been working with probiotics with Health Canada for about 15 years, both as an assessor and as a supervisor. Today I'm going to talk to you about probiotics as natural health products, an overview of some of our guidance and regulations, some updates to our guidance, and some prospects for products that are similar in the future. So the regulations under the Food and Drugs Act encompass a number of different categories. They include and define out cosmetics, devices, drugs, and foods. Particularly today, we'll be dealing with the drug aspect of things, or the natural health product regulations that fall under the drug category, which basically includes probiotic supplements. Now, we do work with other counterparts across Health Canada. It is a fairly large organization, so we do share some knowledge and communicate with people in cosmetics and other areas. So the Nnhpd Probiotics Monograph is one of the guidance documents we have to help applicants basically learn how to apply for licenses for things like probiotic supplements. So it defines out a number of different things, including a route of administration. So for the monograph itself, it only deals with oral probiotics. It also allows for certain claims, generally general health claims, such as source of probiotics for up to 53 different species of microorganisms. There are also some other general health claims that we allow for most others, including help support intestinal gastrointestinal health and could promote favorable gut flora. Now, all of that said, the monograph isn't exactly species specific. We do want to see strain specific information for the different applications that come in. Those are the requirements that are done. So we do have some strain specific claims as well. and they include H. pylori adjunctive treatments, acute infectious diarrhea, antibiotic-associated diarrhea, and others that are also there. Now, the approach that we have to natural health products when it comes to actual guidance and the administration over top of the licenses that we authorize, basically there are three different streams. There's a class 1 type of product, which takes 60 calendar days for us to process and to get through to the stage of licensing. These are products that are supported by one monograph, so like the probiotic monograph that I just alluded to. There are also class 2 products, which take up to 90 calendar days to review, and those are supported by a combination of monographs, so something like probiotics plus inulin. And then there are class 3 products, which undergo actually some pretty intense review by times, depending on what the product is and what it claims. These reviews can go up to 210 days. These are our standards. Sometimes we go over. And these products generally have something that isn't fully supported by the monographs. So maybe there's a claim that isn't on the monograph that we need to review, or a different subpopulation, or the like. The review process itself, when it comes to class 3 product assessments, can be quite rigorous, and we do have some guidance documents that we start with and that we would like applicants to be familiar with. So the evidence requirements are described in a few different guidance documents. First and foremost, as mentioned, the probiotics monograph is a great starting point. We also have our safety and efficacy guidance, which is the pathway for licensing natural health products, making modern health claims, and the guidance of quality of natural health products. Now, each one is important. If we're dealing with something that's a little bit off of the monograph, like a microorganism that isn't listed on the monograph, the quality of natural health products guidance, particularly Appendix 4, is very helpful. One of our main duties when we actually assess these more complicated products, or the class 3 stream, is we really do need to link the scientific evidence with the conditions of use of a product on the market or an application coming in. The main thing that we do look at is more or less dosing and claims and safety. But dosing tends to be one of the things we look at first. So we look at dose frequency, how much is given in a daily dose. And of course, we do want to make sure that the reference daily dose in the literature is matching up to what the product actually has on its label. We also consider acute versus chronic use of the product. Generally speaking, if a study does not last for longer than 6 months, then we'll probably be looking to put a duration of use on it. If it is a study that's longer than 6 months that's supporting the product, then basically we'll more or less be considering it may be possible to have an indefinite duration of use for it. We also look at target population or subpopulation for who the product is really targeted for in marketing. So are there any vulnerable subpopulations involved, such as children or infants? And if there are, we'll consider that, particularly for anyone under the age of 1 year old. Quantitative results are also important when it comes to looking at the actual claims and safety. We do want to see statistical significance as compared to placebo, as with any well-designed trial. One other thing we do look at is whether or not it's clinically relevant as opposed to just statistically there. This may be important when it comes to things looking at topics such as irritable bowel syndrome, where you might want to see a higher percentage in terms of what's significant rather than just a small percentage increase, just based off of due to known placebo effects. All right, so for how we look at evidence, one of the interesting parts of the Canadian system is that we actually have a sliding gradient of evidence requirements based off of what the risk of the product is deemed to be. So for any minor condition that's naturally resolving within a timely manner, and for underperforming products that shouldn't pose any major health risk, the evidence requirements, to be blunt, are about one phase 2 clinical trial that's well designed. Now, if there's any methodologically weak flaws in that trial, we would want to see it supplemented to demonstrate consistency in results and plausibility. Some examples of claims for this category would include helps to reduce gastrointestinal discomfort, abdominal pain, nausea, vomiting, helps to reduce the symptoms of irritable bowel syndrome, and source of probiotics. For our medium risk category, we'd be dealing with major diseases and conditions. So something that does not naturally resolve within a timely manner and could persist or worsen if it wasn't treated in a timely manner. For this type of product, we generally would want to see a couple of different phase 2 clinical trials that were well designed. And again, if they were weak, we'd want to see them supplemented with other evidence just to make sure that there is consistency and that it is believable in the scientific realm. Examples of claims in this category would be traveler's diarrhea, managing irritable bowel syndrome, antibiotic-associated diarrhea, and bacterial vaginosis. For the high-risk category of product, we'd be dealing with serious diseases and conditions. So anything that would be debilitating or potentially life-threatening without effective treatment. We do see products like this, and we do get claims for these things. The one thing I will warn in this regard is that we are very heavy on the science for these claims. So we want to see at least 2 phase 3 clinical trials that are well designed and extremely well designed that would hold up to scientific rigor, or a multi-center trial. So examples of claims for this would be something in the realm of inflammatory bowel disease, and C. difficile and H. pylori treatments, as well as hepatic encephalitis. This leads me into our current science and regulatory practices that affect probiotic regulation in this portion of the presentation. Perhaps one of the more known things that's out there is that there has been a fairly large name change in the scientific literature related to lactobacilli. So what's the current situation for supplements in Canada? I've been out there basically trying to communicate what we're up to in this regard and the implications for the monograph. And we are still on schedule to publish later this year. But to go through some of the background for those of us who may not be aware, I'll go quickly. So modern methodology, genetic analysis, has resulted in the need to split apart the Lactobacillus genus. Many genera are phylogenetically interwoven, and the genus basically is highly heterogeneous, or was, and does need to get split up. Now, the impact of this name change has been actually quite large in terms of how many licenses it affects in Canada. So for the supplements, last year it affected more than 1,400 products in terms of labeling changes that would have to be made to the naming. That's a lot of amendments, it's a lot of notifications that would have to be processed. So we're working on what kind of streamlined processes would be best to account for all of these changes. I can tell you now that a year later, we're above 1,600. So it is an issue, and we're working on some solutions and some guidance around how we can get through this. Now, there's also been some discussion in expert circles and in the literature and in industry about how we could be labeling for this change. Now, a lot of the genera that have been changed also start with the letter L. So the idea was maybe we can just change the lactobacillus to an L dot on the labels. The one thing I can say about that is we could potentially accommodate that to some extent for the Canadian label. The problem is that our regulation actually does require the full genus name to be labeled itself. And it would have to be on one of the principal panels where the ingredients are listed. So basically we've come up with a bit of a solution to this for any organization that wants to use the L dot. Basically you can have it, L dot, for instance, Paraskevakos, and then you'd have an asterisk and include the full Latin name underneath on the same panel. So what does this mean for the probiotics monograph, and how are we going to be including all of the actual changes for it in terms of the nomenclature. As I mentioned in some other meetings from the past, we actually have a lot of background systems that had to be changed up first. Some of our ingredient databases were a little bit antiquated in the background, so we've got those fixed up, and it looks like we'll be able to do this a little bit easier now. So we're ready from a technical perspective. The updated draft is right now in translation, so we are still on schedule to have it published by the end of this year. And for anyone who does want to get their products through licensing and with the new names, that can be done through the amendment system right now. We're working to try to move it to more of a notification system, which is a quicker process. But that's still in the works, and I can't quite comment on that just yet. So we are trying to coordinate also with other labeling initiatives across Health Canada, and other timing, of course, does need to be considered in workload. And the workload, of course, increased with the pandemic. Canadian border issues are not anticipated for these name changes. For licensed NHPs, international shipping really isn't expected to be impacted. Basically, a product with an MPN should continue to be able to move freely across the Canadian border. And if an ingredient isn't on the prescriptions drugs list in Canada, it generally can be imported. So that includes pretty much all probiotics, or all probiotics of commerce. There's also going to be a 3-year grace period from the time we publish the monograph for actually requiring those name changes. So generally the impacts on exports should be negligible. It should be manageable. And we will have additional communications to limit any negative impacts. So that said, workload is a factor in terms of how we can work through these scientific issues as well as just getting through product applications. One thing I wanted to mention is that working with natural health products, it's not just probiotics, there are other products too. So the major impact for us during the pandemic was looking at hand sanitizers and safety. To date, there aren't any that are actually approved with COVID-19 related claims, although some effectiveness against viruses can help reduce infection. That is, to some extent, understood. I did include a link here so that anyone interested could follow it just to see some of the work that's been done. Now, there are other pandemic-related applications that have been done as well, more or less related to immunology and some related to probiotics. But we do have to shift our workload around to the most urgent priorities, and this happened a lot during the initial stages of the pandemic. Okay, so medical use considerations for probiotics. If we look into the past and we look at these higher-end probiotics, there's always a call for improvement for quality control over top of them. So procedures such as fermentation, matrix composition, cell harvesting, spray drying, freeze drying, and storage conditions like temperature, humidity, and pH are just several out of a wide array of manufacturing determinants that can affect microbial survival, growth, viability, and ultimately the study results and/or clinical outcomes. This is a statement we generally agree with, brought to us by the European Society for Pediatric Gastroenterology, Hepatology, and Nutrition. Now, one thing that I did want to suggest is that there are some publications out there that suggest probiotics intended for medical use and manufactured at unstudied sites should potentially include the assessment of biochemical and immunological profiles for a product, animal and human testing. And this might seem a little extraordinary for a supplement that's basically just on over-the-counter shelf. But if you start thinking about it more as medical use, this is more in line with what we would want to look at in terms of consistency for making a product that matters. Now, to allude to the future prospects here, postbiotic analysis. A postbiotic could be arguably just what's left over from a probiotic. Anything for medical use, we may want to consider similar requirements. So what are postbiotics, and do they affect probiotic quality themselves? So the answer basically is that they don't generally affect probiotic quality because a postbiotic has to have a benefit in terms of generally how it's understood in the literature at the moment. If it doesn't have a benefit, I don't think you could really call it a postbiotic. The concept is still relatively new, however, and there isn't really a recognized definition for the term just yet. It's currently used to refer to bioactive compounds, which didn't fit the traditional definitions of probiotics, prebiotics, or paraprobiotics. So the effect from non-viable organisms. Could this really be considered a postbiotic effect? Is this something that affects probiotics? I think we need to look a little bit at the past literature and how we've looked at it. So proper handling of the probiotic in manufacture and production matters for viability and reproducibility of product content. So if you want consistent results with the probiotic, then you need to have good manufacturing behind it. I think that goes the same for anything that's created for a postbiotic. If you want to get consistency with them, you need to have similar manufacturing standards behind them. Do they affect what a probiotic does? That's another matter. I think you have to delve further into the literature and the past for that. So in many cases, probiotic viability is a prerequisite or was considered a prerequisite for a health benefit. But even as early as 2012, there were some cases where non-viable probiotics could also be seen with beneficial effects. Now that said, there were too few data at the time to make firm conclusions on the clinical efficacy of non-viable probiotics. Although the use of probiotics can be considered still an attractive strategy for altering the microbiome. And I think the jury's still out to some extent, and that further study into their efficacy and safety is still warranted. Now, we have seen some specific strain information come in on the postbiotic side of things, and yes, we have looked at them in a strain-specific way in terms of how the actual ingredient is prepared. So that has been important on the regulatory front for us in Canada. So with that, that brings me to the end of the presentation. I'd like to thank you for your time, and I hope for those of you who are able to make it to Rome, enjoy the hospitality. And for those of you who don't, I hope that you enjoyed the presentation. Thank you very much. And feel free to contact me by email if you have any further questions.
Well, as Michael said, a lot of interesting information, even postbiotic. We've had discussions with them regarding that, so they have, interesting views regarding it. If you'd like the presentation, he flashed his email. If not, give me a shout or let me know, and we'll get it to you. So moving on to the next presentation. Again, it's pre-recorded. It's Andrea Virginia Moser. She's the head of Food Evaluation and Registration Services at National Food Institute in Argentina, otherwise known as INAL. Her presentation was in Spanish, and I want to thank David Piñera for helping us with the translation. So there'll be the translation will be underneath because she's going to deliver it in Spanish. She'll outline the regulatory frameworks for probiotics in Argentina, and then segue a little bit and touch on the codex work that they're leading at the CCNFSDU Codex Committee. So I'll leave you to the presentation.
Buenos días para todos. Bueno, es un placer poder participar de este evento y la verdad de esta forma virtual y con esta modalidad que me ha facilitado poder ser parte de este congreso. Agradezco sobre todo a IPA Canadá por la invitación y a los organizadores también por proporcionar estas facilidades. Calculo yo que seguiré después la presentación, esto será pregrabado y calculo que podré participar el día del evento, el día 13 de septiembre. Seguiré virtualmente la presentación. Espero que tengan una buena jornada. Bueno, me presento, yo soy Andrea Moser, de Buenos Aires, Argentina. Trabajo en el instituto, en un organismo técnico que es Nnhpd, que depende del Ministerio de Salud de la Nación. es la Administración Nacional de Alimentos, Medicamentos y Tecnología Médica, que tiene entre sus funciones, sus objetivos, es garantizar la salud de la población a través de regular o fiscalizar los productos de su competencia, entre ellos los alimentos, que sean seguros, inocuos y de calidad. La presentación que me trae en este momento es contarles un poco la experiencia regulatoria en Argentina, en nuestro país, sobre los probióticos en alimentos y cómo se ha ido actualizando dicha normativa. Los probióticos en el país tienen aproximadamente, llevan 20 años que están instalados en el mercado, sobre todo fueron siempre alimentos lácteos y suplementos dietarios. Y si bien contamos con una normativa de hace 10 años, me animaría a decir que no está tan regulado el mercado de los probióticos y sobre todo lo que es en las cuestiones de publicidad. Antes de entrar prácticamente en la norma particular sobre probióticos, me gustaría ponerlos en contextos y contarles básicamente cómo es el marco normativo en nuestro país. La ley fundamental que regula los alimentos es el Código Alimentario Argentino, Ley 18284, reglamentada por un decreto, y es el que establece o reúne todas las disposiciones higiénico-sanitarias y de identificación comercial de los alimentos, sus establecimientos elaboradores y comercializadores. Constituye la ley fundamental del sistema de control de alimentos y se actualiza permanentemente a través de un organismo que es técnico, la Comisión Nacional de Alimentos, con la idea de adecuarse a los adelantes en la materia, teniendo como referencia siempre la normativa internacional y los acuerdos celebrados en el ámbito del Mercosur. Esta Comisión Nacional de Alimentos está constituida por los Ministerios de Salud de la Nación, el Ministerio de Agricultura, Ganadería y Pesca, el de Innovación Científica, la Secretaría de Comercio y las distintas autoridades regulatorias que conforman nuestro territorio. Tiene un órgano de consulta obligatoria, pero no vinculante, que está conformado por el sector regulado, las empresas y los ciudadanos. Este código alimentario está constituido por 22 capítulos que establece, como dije, todas las disposiciones sobre los alimentos y sus establecimientos elaboradores. Tiene además normas transversales sobre la conservación y tratamiento, sobre la rotulación y publicidad, aditivos alimentarios y coadyuvantes de tecnología, un capítulo especial sobre los envases, materiales en contacto con alimentos, metodología analítica y los capítulos referidos a los alimentos, a las distintas categorías de alimentos en particular, definiendo sus parámetros de identidad, calidad e inocuidad, como por ejemplo para el caso de los alimentos, capítulos para los alimentos farináceos, las bebidas analcohólicas, bebidas alcohólicas, alimentos lácteos, grasas y aceites, alimentos cárnicos, es decir, para todos los tipos de alimentos. Y existe además un capítulo, que es el capítulo 17 del Código, que es el que regula o define los alimentos de régimen o dietético. Dentro de este capítulo hoy están regulados los probióticos en alimentos. Antes de entrar a la norma particular sobre los probióticos, me gustaría contarles un poco cuáles fueron los antecedentes o los motivos que necesitaron ser revisados en nuestro país y que dieron lugar a la normativa sobre los probióticos en alimentos. Los probióticos existen en el mercado desde hace 20 años en el mercado nacional. La definición es reconocida desde el año 1980 y aceptada también en la comunidad científica desde hace más de un siglo. Sin embargo, en Argentina no teníamos claro el uso del término ni armonizado la denominación de probiótico en un alimento. Comienzan a suceder alrededor del año 2002-2003 el aumento de productos del mercado, sobre todo alimentos lácteos y suplementos dietarios. Estos alimentos se publicitan con beneficios para la salud, por lo cual uno interpretaba que los responsables de esos beneficios para la salud eran los probióticos. Sin embargo, se generaba bastante confusión en el consumidor porque no había la ausencia de normativa o de criterios no había un entendimiento claro sobre lo que era un alimento con probiótico o un alimento denominado con probiótico. Por otro lado, teníamos a la industria que marcaba o planteaba continuamente problemas en el comercio de los productos, dado que no había pautas claras para rotular un alimento con probiótico y cuáles eran los requisitos para que pudieran llevar esa denominación. Otra de las cuestiones que también surgieron fueron que se evidenció la existencia en el mercado de productos rotulados como probióticos y que tampoco tenían el sustento científico o cumplían los requisitos mínimos para ser considerados como tales y por lo tanto terminaban siendo un engaño para el consumidor. Todo este abanico de situaciones obviamente traía problemas en la fiscalización de los productos, dado que la falta de una normativa no establecía ni pautas claras ni para los reguladores ni para la industria. Todo este escenario llevó a que en el año 2004-2005, a través del organismo técnico, la CONAL, por el cual se actualiza la normativa, se estableciera un grupo de trabajo y se le propuso como objetivo proponer una definición y parámetros para los probióticos. En ese momento, el Instituto Nacional de Alimentos, al cual yo pertenezco y trabajo desde hace casi 30 años en ese instituto, fue el encargado de liderar este grupo de trabajo. Y en el término de 3 años, el grupo, manteniendo diferentes tipos de reuniones con el sector académico, con el sector regulado y con la industria, propuso un proyecto de normativa con una definición para los probióticos y requisitos que debían cumplir estos. Esta normativa igualmente tardó casi 2 años en ponerse en vigencia y se incorporó al código en el año 2011 como artículo 1389. Los antecedentes que se utilizaron para evaluar este proyecto de normativa fue la normativa internacional, que en ese momento ya estaban, se conocían los informes de expertos de las 2 reuniones de FAO-OMS celebradas sobre declaraciones de propiedades saludables y nutricionales en alimentos, como fue la celebrada en Argentina en el año 2001 y en 2002 celebrada en Córdoba, que sentaron los precedentes o los antecedentes para elaborar nuestra normativa. Los resultados de todo este trabajo fueron la incorporación al capítulo 17 del Código como artículo 1389 de una normativa específica que establecía una definición para los probióticos, requisitos que debían cumplir, un protocolo de evaluación que debían cumplir una cepa probiótica para ser considerada como ingrediente de un alimento y crea una comisión evaluadora de probióticos y prebióticos. Esta comisión, lo comento, no viene al caso, pero conjuntamente con el desarrollo de un proyecto de normativa o de propuesta para probióticos como ingredientes y alimentos con probióticos, también se hizo, el grupo desarrolló una normativa para prebióticos que se incorpora al código como artículo 1390 en el mismo año. Por eso la comisión resultante es evaluadora tanto de alimentos con prebióticos como con probióticos. ¿Qué establece particularmente el artículo? Establece una definición de probióticos y define como probióticos microorganismos vivos que administrados en cantidades adecuadas confieren beneficios para la salud del consumidor. Además establece esta definición basada en la definición de FAO-OMS del año 2001. Además establece que para que una cepa sea considerada probiótica debe cumplir con el protocolo de evaluación. Y define además alimento con probiótico, que es aquel que tiene una carga de células viables entre 10 a la sexta y 10 a la 9 unidades formadoras de colonia durante todo su periodo de vida, duración mínima, y mantiene además la funcionalidad, la cepa, en esa matriz o en ese alimento. Además de esta definición, el artículo estableció distintos requisitos para los probióticos. Requisitos mínimos, que son la identificación de la cepa. Esta cepa debiera estar identificada a nivel de género, especie y subespecie. Si bien la normativa no establece una metodología en particular, recomienda técnicas moleculares basadas en la secuenciación del gen 16S-RN y que deben ser realizados por laboratorios reconocidos a nivel nacional o con referencia internacional. Después establece que deben realizarse ensayos de caracterización in vitro e in vivo. Estos ensayos, la finalidad de los ensayos es demostrar que la cepa probiótica llega viva al intestino y puede llegar viable tolerando las distintas barreras del organismo. Se requieren ensayos de resistencia gástrica a nivel del estómago, resistencia a la bilis a nivel del duodeno y resistencia a la lisozima, que es opcional, resistencia a la boca. Además de los ensayos de caracterización, los más importantes son los ensayos in vivo e in vitro que demuestren el efecto o el beneficio para la salud adjudicado al probiótico, que deben estar debidamente documentados y validados y realizados por organismos con referencia también de reconocimiento a nivel nacional o internacional. Y después se establece otros requisitos, como los requisitos de seguridad. La cepa no debe ser riesgosa para la salud, no debe promover la traslocación, ni promover ni presentar traslocación bacteriana, es decir, el pasaje de las células del intestino más allá de los nódulos mesentéricos. Y además presenta o requiere requisitos adicionales o complementarios para garantizar la seguridad de la cepa y que apuntan a que la cepa no debe presentar resistencia a antibióticos, el gen responsable de la actividad hemolítica no debe estar presente, ni deben ser productoras de toxinas. Hasta acá un poco todos los requisitos mínimos y con respecto a los ensayos que demuestren el efecto o el beneficio para la salud que pide la normativa o exige la normativa para que una cepa sea considerada probiótica y puede ser ingrediente de un alimento como tal. Otras cuestiones que también establece el artículo son cuestiones de rotulado. La cepa probiótica se podrá autorizar o podrá comercializarse como ingrediente probiótico, como materia prima, y en este caso deberá estar identificada con género, especie y subespecie, su identificación comercial. Y en el caso de tratarse de un alimento con probióticos, deberá llevar el alimento, la denominación que le corresponde de acuerdo al tipo de alimento y a la definición que le ha dado el código con respecto a sumando o incorporando además en la denominación el término con probióticos. Además deberá incluir en el listado de ingredientes la identificación de la cepa y la cantidad de células viables de acuerdo a lo que establece la normativa. Resumiendo un poco, ¿qué podemos decir con respecto a la normativa argentina con respecto a los probióticos? Que contamos con una normativa desde el año 2011 que establece una definición de probióticos, de alimentos con probióticos y requisitos particulares para una cepa. Se pueden autorizar se pueden comercializar como ingredientes probióticos como ingredientes de alimentos o bien alimentos con probióticos. Es un requisito previo para nuestra normativa que un alimento previo al mercado reciba la autorización o el registro de la autoridad sanitaria correspondiente de acuerdo al lugar donde se elabora. Y en este caso, el informe que emita la comisión evaluadora que creó el artículo será la responsable o será el aval para poder autorizar este producto y que pueda salir al mercado a comercializarse. Esta comisión evaluadora fue recientemente publicada, actualizada en sus funciones en agosto del 2021, y son funciones de estas, por ejemplo, la de evaluar toda la documentación de acuerdo al protocolo de evaluación establecido en el artículo para aquellos ingredientes o alimentos con probióticos que se presenten ante las distintas autoridades sanitarias. Determinar además si son necesarios repetir ensayos para demostrar el efecto o el beneficio para la salud. Emitir una opinión fundada en función de todos los antecedentes evaluados. Adoptar su propio reglamento y además informar, publicar y mantener actualizado el listado de prebióticos y probióticos para uso como ingredientes de alimentos. Esto es en sí un poco todo lo que reúne o establece la normativa sobre probióticos para alimentos. ¿Qué observamos nosotros igualmente a la fecha? Que si bien hubo una adecuación de los alimentos en el mercado y que se fue dando en forma gradual en cuanto a composición y rotulado, se ha observado últimamente un aumento considerable de los alimentos y suplementos dietarios con probióticos de origen importado, sobre todo en estos 2 últimos años, y fundamentalmente de suplementos dietarios. Y esto quizás coincidió con que recientemente también se actualizó la normativa de suplementos dietarios, permitiendo como únicos ingredientes a los probióticos. Antes, un suplemento dietario sí o sí tenía que tener en su formulación un nutriente, por lo cual esto era una condición que dejaba por fuera a muchos suplementos dietarios de origen importado, que notamos que son los que tienen lugar ahora, que el aumento, o sea, se ha producido un aumento debido a este cambio de normativa y cambio de encuadre. Estamos notando una gran cantidad de productos y sobre todo que vienen de Europa, de España y de Estados Unidos que se ajustan o que se comercializan o solicitan la autorización para comercializar como suplementos dietarios con probióticos. Este aumento de evaluaciones en el ámbito de la comisión implicó una gran diversidad de productos de diferentes orígenes, con diferentes normativas y a veces diferentes encuadres. Tuvimos ciertas dificultades al aplicar el protocolo y entendemos que quizás, a pesar de tener 11 años ya de llevar con la normativa publicada, sería necesario realizar una revisión de esta. Y para eso creo que es importante contar con una normativa de referencia sobre probióticos a nivel global. Consideramos, bueno, esto me da pie justamente para contarles sobre el otro tema previsto que tenía para esta presentación, que es en el ámbito de Códex existe una propuesta de nuevo trabajo que se está desarrollando sobre los directrices armonizadas sobre el uso de probióticos en alimentos y complementos alimenticios. Si bien es cierto que a nivel internacional está reconocido el uso del término probiótico, no existe en ese ámbito o a nivel general una definición armónica y criterios armónicos para definir a los probióticos y establecer pautas claras tanto para la industria, para los reguladores, como para que lleguen productos inocuos o seguros para el consumidor. Y es así que en el año 2017, en el Comité de Nutrición, se inicia o se propone una propuesta. IPA, como observador, propuso desarrollar directrices armonizadas sobre probióticos en alimentos y complementos alimenticios. Entendiendo que en ese momento entendemos que, dados los mismos motivos que argumentaron o los cuales nosotros tuvimos como argumentos para actualizar la normativa, sumado a la importancia que tiene el ámbito de Códex, llevó a presentar a IPA esta propuesta de nuevo trabajo en el Comité de Nutrición. Y es así como en el año 2017, en la reunión 39, Argentina apoya la propuesta y manifiesta su disposición a liderar el trabajo. En la reunión de ese año se concluye entonces que Argentina deberá presentar para el año 2018, la reunión 40, un proyecto de documento y un documento de debate con un proyecto de documento sobre directrices armonizadas para el uso de probióticos en alimentos y complementos alimenticios. Bueno, un poco contarles qué es lo que está pasando con esa nueva propuesta de nuevo trabajo en el ámbito del Comité de Nutrición. Como dijimos, como les dije ya, en el 2017 IPA hace la solicitud, Argentina manifiesta su disposición a elaborar la propuesta y así lo hace, y en el 2018, en la reunión 40, Argentina presentó el proyecto de documento y documento de debate. Si bien durante la reunión hubo opiniones diversas, había miembros que estaban a favor, otros que estaban en contra, en que no había necesidad de abordar este nuevo trabajo. Sin embargo, el comité concluyó que Argentina debía volver a redactar el trabajo presentado, revisando algunas cuestiones como, por ejemplo, aclarar el ámbito de aplicación, la definición, algunas cuestiones relativas al comercio y a la salud, y volver a presentarlo en el año 2019, que sería la reunión 41 del Comité de Nutrición. Bueno, así lo hace, y en el año 2019 Argentina vuelve a presentar la propuesta revisada, pero vuelve a surgir el debate nuevamente, miembros que estaban a favor, miembros que estaban en contra, que no era necesaria la propuesta, otros que sí. Sin embargo, en ese año surge dentro del Comité de Nutrición un nuevo documento que es un mecanismo de asignación de prioridades, y el comité, la plenaria, decide que Argentina vuelva a presentar el documento, que lo vuelva a presentar de acuerdo con el mecanismo de asignación de prioridades. También en esa reunión surge la propuesta de otro país, Malasia, para trabajar con Argentina y revisar la propuesta y generar el nuevo documento con la justificación de acuerdo al mecanismo de asignación de prioridades, para presentar otra vez el proyecto o las directrices armonizadas en la reunión 42, que sería en el año 2020. Por todas las situaciones que conocemos de COVID o de pandemia, en el año 2020 se vieron afectado el calendario del Códex General, del Comité General de Códex, como también de los comités particulares, y por lo tanto en el 2020 no hubo reunión en el Comité de Nutrición, por lo tanto no se trató ningún tema. Lo que sí quedó expresado que Argentina debía presentar el documento, se estableció una fecha para presentar el documento de marzo del 2021. Y así Argentina, junto con Malasia, presentaron en diciembre del 2021, la propuesta con el documento de debate y el proyecto de documento, más la justificación de acuerdo al mecanismo de asignación de prioridades, que todavía no tuvo tratamiento. ¿Qué implicó ajustar el documento de proyecto y el documento de debate con la justificación? Dar respuesta a algunas cuestiones que planteaba el nuevo documento de asignación de prioridades. Dar respuesta, por ejemplo, así. El nuevo trabajo que se proponía constituye la revisión de una normativa que ya existe, si era una solicitud del Comité General de Códex, si era la solicitud de algún comité en particular. Debían dar también dar respuesta, por ejemplo, a cuestiones este documento, la población objetivo de este documento, y cuestiones como, por ejemplo, el impacto que iba a tener la norma en las cuestiones de la inocuidad alimentaria, las prácticas y la seguridad en la salud, y el aspecto en la salud y las prácticas equitativas en el comercio. Bueno, en función de todo este planteo que genera el mecanismo del documento de asignación de prioridades, se genera un documento que está aún en el ámbito del Comité de Nutrición, no ha sido todavía remitido a los países para comentarios, que seguramente será breve previamente a cuando se dé la nueva reunión y entre en agenda el tema. Lo que está previsto en el Comité de Asignación de Prioridades es que este nuevo trabajo va a ser sometido en la próxima reunión, cuando ocurra la plenaria, en una reunión paralela, un grupo de trabajo evaluará el documento en función de una matriz de decisión y determinará la justificación y si es necesario o se justifica abordar este trabajo como nuevo trabajo en el Comité de Nutrición. O sea que estamos sujetos a las decisiones que dé el grupo paralelo y a la discusión que se dé en la próxima reunión plenaria en función de la opinión que elabore el grupo paralelo de trabajo. Bueno, y un poco ya para finalizar, estamos en la instancia en que, bueno, sabemos puntualmente que en el año 2000, en la agenda de la reunión del año 2021 para la reunión del Comité de Nutrición, no está previsto que entren las directrices armonizadas de probióticos, pero tenemos entendido, o conocimiento por lo menos, que se va a tratar en el año 2022, en junio está previsto. Lo que no se sabe es si va a ser una reunión complementaria a la del 2021 o una nueva reunión. Y esperemos entonces que en esa instancia que se proponga, podamos seguir trabajando como propuesta de nuevo trabajo. Consideramos, de más está decirlo, pero el trabajo propuesto está en línea con los objetivos del general de Códex, justamente de proteger la salud y de brindar prácticas equitativas en el comercio de alimentos a través de la generación de normas y la publicación de las normas. Entendemos que es necesario en ese ámbito poder contar con una normativa o con directrices armonizadas como herramientas que constituyen una herramienta de aplicación tanto para las autoridades regulatorias, para los regulados, que en este caso es la industria, y para el consumidor, y de alguna manera poner pautas claras para todos los ámbitos, y que sí sea el ámbito ese de tratamiento del tema. Bueno, y esto es todo con respecto a la idea de comentarles un poco sobre nuestra normativa en particular y sobre el documento de directrices que se está tratando en el ámbito del Comité de Nutrición. Calculo que no sé si habrá preguntas, y si serán en el espacio, seguramente será cuando tenga lugar la presentación, y creo que podré seguir virtualmente el estado para dar respuesta a las inquietudes que surjan. Bueno, muchas gracias por la atención.
Thank you to Andrea for that very extensive presentation on regulations in Argentina, but also some of the work they're doing at the Codex. Very quickly, we're moving to the next one. Lucy Lang, who's the head of Global Regulatory Affairs at the Complementary Medicines Australia. In the last year, we've done some interesting work together with CMA, and because there was some requirement to outreach to the TGA. TGA has taken quite an interest in probiotics in the last year, where, you know, together with CMA, IPA has led some of the commentaries that we've put forth to the TGA, and we've proposed an outreach workshop with TGA in 2022. Well, we're waiting to hear back from them. So the next presentation is Lucy Lang from CMA in Australia. Obviously, she couldn't travel with us, so we had to ask her for virtual.
My name is Lucy Lang. I'm the Head of Regulatory Affairs for Complementary Medicines Australia, and I'm here to discuss current regulatory affairs for probiotics in Australia. And just for context, I do have a background in regulatory affairs. I'm not specifically a probiotic expert, so we rely on the experts that we know, including International Probiotics Association. So about complementary medicines and Complementary Medicines Australia, we are the peak industry body for the complementary medicines industry, including all stakeholders across the value chain. We work with other peak bodies to achieve the best outcomes, and we work with the International Probiotics Association on issues affecting the probiotics industry. We do an annual industry audit, and there's just a few figures here to help you get a sense of the Australian industry and how that works. In Australia, we have about 1/4 of our population who uses probiotics, both men and women, as you can see in this figure. And year on year, probiotics grew 6% in 2020. So they were one of the fastest growing ingredients or categories. And we do export a lot of complementary medicines, including probiotics. Australia remains the largest source of nutrition and health food imports to China, with an import volume of about $926 million US, right just ahead of the USA to China. About 70% of our exports go to China and Hong Kong, and to other Asian countries and Oceania and the Middle East. So probiotics regulation in Australia. We're a little bit different to other countries, I suppose, in that probiotics are not regulated as food supplements or dietary supplements. They are largely regulated as complementary medicines by the Therapeutic Goods Administration under the Therapeutic Goods Act 1989. So we've been regulated this way for about 30 years. Under the Therapeutic Goods Administration, complementary medicines include vitamins, minerals, and nutritional supplements, and microorganisms and their extracts, which includes probiotics, but also includes a broader range of substances, including prebiotics, killed microorganisms, and extracts of microorganisms. And so the microorganisms include bacteria, fungi, and algae. Complementary medicines also include traditional medicines, including traditional Chinese medicines, Australian Indigenous medicines, and others. And of course, some probiotics in Australia are still regulated as foods when they are in a typical food format, such as drinks, yogurts, kefir, etc. Probiotics and related substances as complementary medicines. So TGA does not have legislation specific to probiotics, except in the quality category. The TGA legislation classifies the following items that are relevant to the probiotic industry, classified under complementary medicines. So a microorganism, whole or extracted, a sugar, polysaccharide or carbohydrate, plant or herbal materials, but under that they do include plant fibers for prebiotics, enzymes, algae, fungi, etc. So how are they regulated as medicines in Australia? So we have a register of therapeutic goods, and there's 3 ways to get probiotics as complementary medicines onto that register. The first way is the listed medicine pathway. The second way is the listed assessed medicine pathway. And the third is the registered medicine pathway, which has the highest level indications for the prevention, alleviation, cure, or management. I don't believe we currently have any probiotics currently as registered medicines in Australia, nor as listed assessed, that category there in the middle. The listed assessed category is useful because we can take existing probiotics and make slightly higher level claims. So we might be able to mention a serious disease or the prevention, alleviation, or management of a non-serious condition. This is provided that product level evidence can be provided for the particular product that's being assessed. This is a new pathway. It's been around about 2 years. There have been some products through, but no probiotics as yet. An example of a claim that could be made is prevention of hay fever. However, this means the bulk of probiotics are all in the listed medicine category, which make the lower level indications for health maintenance, enhancement, or non-serious diseases or conditions. So listed medicines are most probiotics. Listed medicines have pre-approved ingredients, so pre-approved probiotic organisms. They must comply with good manufacturing practice, and manufacturers in Australia need to comply with the PICS code of GMP. We do get some concessions being a lower risk medicine, but we do have very strict GMP requirements. And there are pre-approved therapeutic indications that are selected by the sponsor, and the TGA does not evaluate those before market because they are low risk and the substances are pre-approved. So the medicine is listed onto the register, and then the TGA can do post-market compliance activities, including examining whether they think the evidence to make those claims is sufficient. They can also examine whether they think the quality of the medicine is sufficient, and if they believe it isn't, then they can take action to remove those products from the market. They can and do this. So what kind of indications can be made for low-risk listed medicines in Australia? With scientific or traditional evidence, you can make claims such as helps enhance or promote gastrointestinal system mucosa health, helps maintain or support good or beneficial friendly gut flora during antibiotic use or after antibiotic use, help enhance or promote GIT mucosa health, help enhance, improve, promote or increase intestinal or good bacteria, beneficial or friendly bacteria growth, and help reduce the occurrence of symptoms of medically diagnosed irritable bowel syndrome. However, as mentioned, the TGA can do compliance reviews of listed probiotics, and in 2016, the TGA targeted vaginal probiotics for a compliance review of evidence, in particular, probiotics for oral use that had vaginal indications. And they stated on their website, there does not appear to be any evidence which demonstrates that any of the following probiotic organisms are effective for vaginal conditions when taken orally: Lactobacillus rhamnosus, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, or Lactobacillus acidophilus. So we saw many of these products either having to remove the claims about vaginal conditions or being removed from the market altogether. The TGA said they conducted a search of the publicly available literature, and they considered 26 papers, and issues they identified included poor study methods with sample sizes, high dropout rates, lack of compliance controls, inadequate reporting of study results, or that they didn't think that the dosage form in the studies was comparable to the commercially available probiotics. So a lot of these issues can come up after the product's already on the market, which can be a problem, but we are fortunate to be able to get them onto the market without their pre-market assessment. Several years ago, there was a new reform that provided that newly improved ingredients get 2 years exclusive use in listed medicines. This was introduced so companies could get to reap the return on investing into research and development to gain the TGA approval for the use of a new substance, including a probiotic or a substance derived from a probiotic. Before this, a company would go to all the effort to get the substance approved, but all the companies would benefit from one company's work from being able to access that substance. So this gives them a 2-year exclusive use period where they get to reap return on the investment and the time and the work that they've put into that substance. For example, on March 1, 2021 of this year, 2-fucosyllactose was approved. I have difficulty saying that one. And it comes with a condition that is only to be used in a medicine where the client who applied to have the ingredient included in the determination is the sponsor of the medicine or has given written authorization to the sponsor of the medicine to include the ingredient in there. And this paragraph is no longer a requirement after March 2023. But this has actually, while this is a positive thing for industry, it has caused issues where more than one company is seeking to have the same substance approved. And unfortunately, we haven't found a great way to deal with it. Currently, it's still first in, best dressed. In Australia, default standards are the required quality standards. So this includes the British Pharmacopoeia, the European Pharmacopoeia, or the United States Pharmacopoeia. This is because Australia does not have its own pharmacopoeia. Being a fairly young country, being colonised by Britain, everybody came over and continued on the use of the British pharmacopoeia. It was only later that the European pharmacopoeia and the United States pharmacopoeia were adopted. That was only, I think, about 15 years ago. So we use these as our default standards, and in some cases we can override them with our own Australian-specific standards that are set by the government. For example, the quality of capsules, tablets and pills, we provide specific requirements, and for labels, so that it overrides the labelling requirements in those pharmacopoeias. So we have a standard for capsules, tablets and pills called the TGO 101, and that document does actually define probiotics as viable defined microorganisms in sufficient numbers to alter the microflora by implantation or colonization in a compartment of the host. And this document provides assay limits for probiotics specifically, rather than microorganisms, as not less than the stated content. To date, the TGA has, I suppose, allowed some leeway in justifying errors when the specification is, when the product is assayed against the specification. And I suppose that issue is under consideration of, is there a margin of error allowed and how much should that be? It has been an issue that's tripped up some companies though, so it is something that we really want to get a good handle on. How can we approach this into the future? The Monograph 3053, Live Biotherapeutic Organisms, as you would all be aware, was introduced in around 2018. Introduction of this monograph has caused issues for Australia, unfortunately, because it gets automatically adopted as the default standard, especially where there's no other standard in place. For example, if the USP don't have a standard for probiotics generally, which they don't. Now, the question has come up is, does the definition of live biotherapeutic organisms, does that apply to probiotics? Is it the same thing or is it different? And what's really interesting is, I think if you look at some definitions of live biotherapeutic organisms, it's not defined in the same way as probiotics. However, when you look at the actual monograph in the pharmacopoeia, the way that it's defined does not exclude probiotic supplements that are used in Australia. And because it doesn't exclude that in that definition within the monograph specifically, the TGA have taken it that the monograph 3053 does in fact apply to probiotics in Australia. Again, causing issues because it wasn't really designed for our market. It was designed more for the European market for higher risk probiotic medicines. So what do we do about this? And does this monograph actually require the enumeration of each strain in a multi-strain probiotic formula? For example, in the assay section, it says the number of microorganisms needs to be determined and the potency of each strain needs to be expressed. Now, we did seek clarification from the European Pharmacopoeia, and they believe that that is the correct interpretation, that each strain in a multi-strain formula needs to be determined. So again, that has caused problems. However, there is a small caveat in Australia, which is that TGA has traditionally allowed quantifying by input with justification. So quantifying by input means you put the organism in and you count it based on what you've put in combination with your stability data. It remains unclear to some extent where specific enumeration of every strain and where quantified by input will be accepted by the TGA. Quantified by input can be used still, according to the TGA, but they believe it needs to be appropriately justified with data. Now, we would agree with that, but I suppose the question is how much data and how robust does that data need to be? We are concerned that the kind of data that the TGA have perhaps been expecting is beyond expectations that can easily or reasonably be met in some or all cases. They've said, importantly, it's not just strain interaction that needs to be considered. It must also be substantiated that there is no change in content of each individual strain from the input to the final product, and I believe also end of shelf life, considering other factors that affect the content, such as the excipients, the processing, the container type, and the water type. These factors may also need to be considered in relation to stability if product-specific stability studies are not undertaken. So this is useful guidance. This is something that we sought from the TGA. It's not currently something that's in the public domain, but it does sort of reflect where, what kind of controls that they expect would be in place. But again, I suppose there's a discussion over whether does it need to be on every product, or can justifications be made based upon other data that's available and an explanation that's provided by the company, and at what point is that accepted or rejected? Considering all of these kind of decisions are happening in the post-market space, it can be a little bit nerve-wracking when companies go through this kind of questioning process with the TGA. So what are the future directions for probiotics in Australia, and what is happening? Really, I think a decision needs to be made on Monograph 3053 and its applicability to probiotic products quality in Australia. Do multi-strain products need to be enumerated? We are maintaining that essentially the typical approach should be continued, whereby you can do the plate count method and count species at the genus level until such time as more advanced technologies are available. The TGA were, I think, hoping that under Monograph 3053 that the more advanced technologies were in common and regular use, but that's not actually the case. It's jumping a little bit too far ahead, and we've made that case and said, can we please pull it back and get there when we're ready, because we're not quite ready yet. So this does bring it back again to quantified by input. How do we answer those questions? How do we set those expectations? So TGA and CMA and a few other industry bodies in Australia have been looking at, do we create a guidance document? And really, what is the content of that guidance document? And is it appropriate? And is it achievable? There have been some difficult conversations going on there. Will this document go forward? We don't know. It's not currently confirmed. We will see. There'll probably be an update by the end of the year. But we certainly are saying we really need to rely upon export probiotic organisations rather than, I think, trying to go it alone as a country or as a regulator or as an industry. We need to cooperate globally. We need to fit in with what is happening internationally. We need to work with the international bodies and with the international processes, because this is a very global industry and everything needs to be aligned. Australia has had wonderful support from the international community, and we really value that a huge amount. The other guidance document that may be coming forward is what is required when a new probiotic substance is allowed or approved for use in Australia. Currently, we haven't had any specific guidance to probiotics. We've only had guidance that's more generic for substances in general, but as we know, probiotics are quite unique and quite different to other substances. That consultation process that we've been going through with the TGA has also been very challenging with a lot of different viewpoints coming up. We have also worked with IPA to respond to that appropriately. Will that document be published? Will it go forward? We still don't know. We think perhaps in 2022 it will, but we want to make sure it's reviewed with a fine-tooth comb first. Labelling issues for probiotics are also under scrutiny. And I didn't make a slide on this particular topic, but we've also had questions about whether inert ingredients, excipients, need to be declared in Australia. Generally, that is the case, not necessarily the quantity, but the actual substance, if they're there as an ingredient in the product. If they're not there as an ingredient and they're in a trace amount, well, those discussions are going on about whether that actually needs to be reflected or not. And clearly for labelling, we also have got all the usual allergens that need to be declared, so milk products, soy products, fish products, all of them, wheat, you name it. So please, if you do supply into Australia, please make sure you declare all your allergens and your ingredients if you can. But we are continuing to work on all of these different topics. in Australia with the TGA and with the help of IPA. So my name is Lucy, Complementary Medicines Australia. That is my email if you want to shoot through any questions. And thanks so much for your time.
Thank you to Lucy for that. So the next is our last pre-recorded session. It's from Gregory Noonan, who's the new acting director of the FDA at the Office of Dietary Supplements. He's going to talk about probiotics under the framework of DSHEA and the new dietary ingredient guidelines, where we're headed with that. We're waiting for commentary from that. And then we're going to jump into the session with IPA Europe.
Hi, I'm Greg Noonan. I'm currently the Acting Deputy Director at the Office of Dietary Supplement Programs. And I'd like to thank the organizers for the opportunity to speak or record today. And hopefully next year, we'll be able to do this in person. Today, I'm going to talk a little bit about the FDA's role in dietary supplement regulation. Because that's actually a really broad topic, decided to focus a little bit on describing some of where our authorities come from, as well as focusing a little bit on the pre-market side of things. I think that's probably the most important and perhaps the most interesting. It's the area that I work in the most. So before I get into the nuts and bolts of supplement regulation, I thought it might be a good idea to give sort of a overview of how supplements are structured within the FDA organizational setting. So the FDA has 7 centers. I have 6 of them shown here at this point. There are the sort of product-specific centers such as drugs, devices, and biologics. Then there's also the Office of Regulatory Affairs, which does a lot of the, runs the field labs, does the testing, deals a lot with imports and inspections. And ORA works across all of the centers to sort of set up these procedures, and there's a lot of interaction there. So in the US, as many of you may know, supplements are considered foods. That's how they're regulated, so they fall within the Center for Food Safety and Applied Nutrition. Now, we work pretty closely with our colleagues in the Office of Regulatory Affairs, but also quite regularly with our colleagues in the Center for Drug Evaluation and Research, especially their botanical drugs team. There's a lot of interaction, a lot of crosstalk there on those types of products and ingredients. Within CFSAN, we are divided into a number of different what we call program offices, depending on the sort of regulatory push. So there's the Office of Food Additive Safety and Office of Colors and Cosmetics that deal with those particular commodities or areas. And of course, the Office of Dietary Supplement Programs is the lead on dietary supplement regulation within CFSAN and then also within the FDA. Now, ODSP is actually a fairly new office. It was split out a little over 5, maybe 6 years ago into its own office. And it's, I think, sort of medium-sized. We have a little over 30 people. We recently went through a reorganization, and we're expanding at this point in time, which we're very excited about. We've currently now divided into 2 different divisions. The Division of Policy and Regulations Implementation deals a lot with the sort of post-market side of things. They deal with our compliance efforts. They deal with commenting on legislation and really important aspects. They do have some pre-market aspects, but a lot of theirs is sort of preparation and post-market. While the Division of Research and Evaluation deals greatly in sort of the pre-market area, and specifically the new dietary ingredient notification area that I'm going to talk more about today. So now that perhaps you'll have a little bit of a feel for the structure of FDA and even ODSP, I want to get into where our specific authorities come from in regulating dietary supplements, and in this case, probiotics or live microbials. So the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act is sort of the major legislation that deals with the majority of FDA commodities. and specifically the Dietary Supplement Health and Education Act, or DSHEA, which was passed in 1994, was the first regulation to really target dietary supplements and talk about dietary supplements. And it did a number of major things. First, perhaps and foremost, it actually set the definition of the term dietary supplement. It also set up this pre-market review, or new dietary ingredient notification review, that I'm going to talk about some more. It authorized the adulteration provisions, and again, food is how those provisions work with dietary supplements. It also gave authority for some GMPs. There are some additional acts which come into play, and I'll just mention them here. I will not get into them much today. The Dietary Supplement Non-Prescription Drug Consumer Protection Act set up a reporting for serious adverse events. And then the Bioterrorism Act of 2002, and followed on by the Food Safety Modernization Act more recently, sort of set up facility registration, the need to renew these registrations, as well as some other requirements. But again, much of that is a sort of post-market, and I'm going to try to focus a little bit more on the pre-market. So getting back to this DSHEA, and specifically the definition of the term dietary supplement. This is sort of the foundation of how ODSP works and how our notification program works. It's really important. So a dietary supplement is a product other than tobacco that is intended to supplement the diet. So if we think about meal replacement plans, or even beverages that may be 16 or a liter or half a liter in size, those generally don't fall into the supplement range. Those are considered foods because they're not simply supplementing the diet. They are part of a meal or a meal. The product must be intended for ingestion, so inhalation or absorption either on the skin or sublingual does not fall into the definition of a dietary supplement. And then it must contain one or more dietary ingredients. And there's a list of ingredients, things that are considered dietary ingredients that I have here that are actually in DSHEA: vitamin, mineral, herb, or botanical, amino acid. Then there's a sort of broader the dietary substance for use by man to supplement the diet by increasing the total dietary intake. So if we had something, maybe fish oil is a great example here, that is commonly eaten as a part of a food. It's part of the diet. It's also now considered a supplement, even though it doesn't fall in any of those other sort of four categories. And then finally, to sort of encompass all of them, a concentrate, metabolite, constituent, extract, or combination of any of the above dietary ingredients. So as long as you have one of these, you're a dietary ingredient. In some cases, you often have more than one. I want to take a little bit closer look at the dietary substance for use by man. This is where sort of most of the live microbials or probiotics sort of fall into this category or part of the definition. So just focusing a little bit more closely on that. So a bacterial microorganism is a dietary ingredient if it is a dietary substance that is an intentional constituent of food. So we think of things used in fermentation for cheese, or fermentation for yogurt, or even yeast. These are bacterial microorganisms that are intended to be there. They play a role, and so they are a dietary substance and then considered a dietary ingredient. And I will say, in just a note here, and I'll get a little bit more into this later, is that within the US, we deal at the strain level. So I think in some other regulatory environments, there's a combination of a species strain, but when we talk about dietary ingredients, we are focusing on the strain when we do our reviews. So a bacteria that's never been consumed as a food are likely to be dietary ingredients. However, the mere presence in food does not mean that it falls into a dietary ingredient. Perhaps the best example of this is pathogenic bacteria. Clearly, we eat salmonella, but again, clearly it's not supposed to be there, so it's not really an intentional constituent of food. So now that we've got some feel in general and even in a sort of probiotic area of what we consider a dietary ingredient, I want to go back a little bit to the definition because there's some other things from DSHEA that distinguish it, supplements, especially distinguishing them from drugs. So there is this exclusion in DSHEA, so dietary supplements do not include certain drug ingredients. A lot of details around that. I don't think it's critical for today, but I just wanted to mention that. Additionally, a dietary supplement may not claim to diagnose, cure, mitigate, treat, or prevent a disease. There are some exceptions for this if we're talking about nutritional deficiencies or qualified health claims. But in the case of a probiotic, if it actually claimed to diagnose or cure a disease, it would actually be regulated under the biologics and not as a supplement. So that's a very important distinction. Supplements, as well as drugs, can make what are called structure or function claims, so affect the structure or function of the body. And the DPRI, the other division within ODSP, spends a good deal of time reviewing these structure function claims. And finally, and perhaps most importantly, dietary supplement products do not undergo a pre-market approval process. And I think the real key word there is approval. There is a pre-market review process for some supplement products or some ingredients, but it is not a approval process. So try to give some background on sort of the definition of a supplement. It was one of the major things that DSHEA did. The other thing it did is it set up this new dietary ingredient notification process, which again establishes a requirement that 75 days prior to marketing, if you have a new manufacturer has a new dietary ingredient, they need to notify the FDA of entering it into the market. It also set up some specific requirements, which I'll go into. They're not extensive, but they are sort of important in the review process. And again, I want to emphasize here, this is not an approval process, but a review process. And really, a new dietary ingredient notification should sort of capture the steps of the thought process, the information that was used by the notifier, by the manufacturer, to come to the conclusion that their product was, one, a dietary supplement, two, that it was safe, and in order to enter it into the market. So it really is the notifier story in this case. So hopefully I've explained a little bit what a dietary ingredient is. The concept of a new dietary ingredient gets a little bit more complicated. So I want to go into that a little bit here. So a new dietary ingredient really deals with when a product or an ingredient was marketed, whether it's present in the food supply, and whether it has been chemically altered. So if an ingredient was marketed prior to 1994, which was when DSHEA was enacted, it's not a new dietary ingredient and an NDI is not required. If a dietary ingredient was not marketed, but was present in the food supply, then it is a new dietary ingredient, but whether it was chemically altered or not determines whether a notification is needed. So if it's not been chemically altered, then a notification is not needed. If it has been chemically altered during the manufacture or the extraction process, then a notification is needed. And then finally, if an ingredient was not marketed and was not present in the food supply as an article used for food prior to 1994, then it is both an NDI and is a requirement of to have a notification submitted. Going to back up just a little bit. I skipped over by mistake. I want to touch quickly on the requirements for a pre-market notification. You can see here that this is what's captured in 21 CFR 190.6. They're not extensive in the sense of there's not a large number of them, and these are the only true requirements. So again, 75 days prior entering market, very basic information such as the name and address of the manufacturer or the distributor. We need the name of the dietary ingredient, and we need a description of this, so the identity. along with the level of the ingredient and the condition of use. And then perhaps most importantly is the history of use or other evidence of safety. And for dietary supplements, the safety bar is reasonably expected to be safe. And then just as a note, 21 CFR lays out that the notification, a redacted notification, and the FDA's response to that notification will be made public after the 90th day. So I'm going to focus a little bit on this description. Again, this is fairly straightforward, but can sort of is often supported by a great deal of information. So first, looking at identity and manufacturing, and I think these things are linked very closely because it's not just about the identity of the product today, but it's the identity of the product tomorrow or a year from now, sort of moving off. You know, what systems have been put in place to make sure that the product today and the product a year from now are the same product. So when it comes to probiotics, again, the identity includes a taxonomic classification of the microorganism and the strain. And again, our ingredients are, we're linked to the strain, whether it's a dietary ingredient, whether it has been used in the food before, even those dates. It's about strain and not species. The method used, tell us about the method you used in order to do this identity. There are some examples there, but any method that's been used is necessary. These are not requirements. These are part of our guidance document. Again, percent similarity with the type of, and a reference strain to the same species, if that is available, that's really useful information. And when it gets to the manufacturing, we want to, again, understand the quality of the finished product. So what specifications are in place, what quality control steps, procedures, control points have been put in place, and tell us about those methods that have been used to quantify the ingredient, as well as methods that are used to make sure that other contaminants, including other harmful pathogens, haven't entered into the system or into the product. Then we get into sort of a characterization and safety. And generally with supplements, there is a history of use that can be used as safety, but if there's not an extensive history of use, there are other evidence of safeties that should be talked about. Clearly, we are interested in antibiotic resistance, which is of great importance, and so understanding the antibiotic resistance, understanding the pathogenicity, the biogenic amines, the productions of mucinase. We'd say also if the safety of the microbial ingredient is based on similar other strains that are in the market, then a detailed analysis of how this ingredient and those ingredients relate is really important. When it gets to sort of history of use or other safety, some of this depends on the relation intended for the product. So if the history of use and the intended intake are very similar, very often that history, there's less detail that needs to be added. Where if the current intake and the history of use are very offset or very different, additional testing or other evidence of safety may be necessary. You know, again, this is really the story that needs to be told by the notifier. Explain how they came to their determination of safety and explain that sort of to the FDA. So I mentioned previously response letters. So while this is not an approval, the FDA does respond to new dietary ingredient notifications, and there are different ways that we can respond. The incomplete is generally given if something specific in 190.6 isn't provided, and after our outreach to the notifier can't be provided. So, for example, if they didn't provide an address, they would end up with an incomplete. That's a requirement of 190.6 and something we have to have. Or if they didn't translate the information, that may end up in an incomplete. So that's very much an administrative letter. There's an acknowledgement without objections, which are often referred to as good day letters, simply saying that we've reviewed the notification and have no objections. There are at times objection letters raising some safety concerns. If the safety determination, we still have concerns over that, we will issue that in a letter. And then there are other regulatory issues. So for example, if we felt that the notifier had not established that the product was, or the ingredient was actually a dietary ingredient, that's something that we would issue with the letter. And I will say, if something is not a dietary ingredient or a supplement, we do not follow through with a safety evaluation. And partly that's because if we don't know what the product is, we can't apply the correct safety standard. And I would say that much of this is a back and forth. So if we get the notification and there's something missing, we will send out a request for more information to try to get some clarity. So it's not as simple as submit it to us, if we review it, and magically 75 days later we give a response. There's often a back and forth during the process. And again, that redacted notification, so any confidential business information is removed, and our response letter are publicly available after the 90th day. So I just wanted to mention briefly as I close out some resources I think that are really useful in both helping understand how to put the notification together and also questions that are specific to probiotics, because they weren't captured in Dosage specifically. And so sometimes there are nuances. One is the 2016 revised draft guidance. Again, this is a guidance document, so it's FDA's current thinking, but it's not a requirement. That's set up as a question and answer document and really quite useful in taking through all of the steps, and does cover bacteria and other live microbials as well. Additionally, there's what we call a pre-NDIN meeting, so a meeting prior to submission and notification. In these meetings, we can answer questions about the process or about the potential notification. Often, notifiers will give us a presentation. We can comment on those and ask questions. What we can't tell you is whether you should or should not submit. Again, this is not an approval process, so that determination must be made by the manufacturer or the notifier. And then finally, unfortunately, we can't tell you the likely outcome of the review. We need all of the information in our hands before we can put forward a formal review. So hopefully with that, I've given you a rough idea of how supplements, especially, are, and where the authority comes from within the U.S., and really hopefully tried to focus on some of that pre-market aspects and make it specific to probiotics because of the fact that they were not identified specifically in Dosage. It's an approach that has been developed over the past 26, 27 years. And with that, thank you for your time.